Welcome to the North Group podcast. At North Group, we are invited into organizations to influence leadership and organizational behavior. It is absolutely fascinating work. Today, we invite you into one of those conversations. Most of the podcast recordings that I participate in or host, I know most of the story in advance. I was involved in it somehow. I have a long relationship with the people involved. And today, that's not the case. So I'm very much looking forward to our conversation today about a really unique situation that we had the privilege of being involved here, Craig, at North Group, in merging two premier agricultural equipment dealers together.
Yes.
So in order to learn about that story, which I think has some really unique elements, not all of which I understand at this point, welcome my friend Eugene Hurst, who's the CEO of the recently merged company, Agriteer. Eugene, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us today. And my partner, Craig Schloninger, who has been instrumental in helping put this merger together and continues to be instrumental in the ongoing success of the company. So welcome and thank you.
Thanks, Roger. It's good to have you here, Eugene.
Yes, good to be here.
So a little bit of history. I was, of course, looking at the website beforehand, and we're going to talk briefly about two companies that are now one. Yeah. And those two companies are both premier Pennsylvania and beyond ag equipment dealers, M.M. Weaver and Binkley & Hurst, located before and after, really, the merger only about, maybe we'd say maybe 12 miles apart?
8 miles apart.
8 miles, thank you.
Yes.
Both of them appear to go all the way back to the 1930s. Is that accurate?
That is correct,
yeah.
Yes.
Maybe you could talk, Eugene, just a little bit about your connection to the history of M.M. Weaver. Why don't we start there?
Yeah. So I came into the merge through the M.M. Weaver side. M.M. Weaver was started back in 1935 by my great-grandfather. His name is Martin M. Weaver. The business was run as Martin Weaver for many years, and then when my grandfather and his brother got involved with the business, they went to M.M. Weaver and Sons Incorporated at that time. My grandfather was Irvin Weaver, his brother Edward Weaver, and they ran the company there at M.M. Weaver's for many years. I grew up on a dairy farm, so I did not grow up at the dealership. Mm-hmm. Got a job someplace else, and my grandfather come to me and said he thinks I would be able to do a good job in the parts department, and I thought I'd just love to work for my grandfather in the parts department there. I thought it sounded exciting. I was in the parts department for 2 years there at M.M. Weaver and was in the sales department for 25 years. Mm-hmm. So M.M. Weaver had Irvin and Edward were brothers, and they were getting up in age, and nobody was really actively taken over the dealership. Had an employee come to me, a long time employee, the employee that's been with us the longest, came and just said something to me. He said, "Hey, Eugene," he said, "are you interested in taking over this company? Are you going to be stepping up and running this company? Because if not, I have another job offer and I'm thinking about taking that." And he said, I want to take a while. I'm still able to. I'm not too old to switch jobs. But if you're taking over, I want to stick around and see what happens here.
How old were you, Eugene?
And that's a good question. I was probably early 30s.
Yeah.
At the time, I was interested, but I wasn't pursuing it at the time. It didn't seem proper for me to be pursuing the position at the time. Mm-hmm. But after I heard that, I realized how serious it was that somebody needs to take leadership here. And for employees to be able to see that somebody's stepping up, because when there's no succession, employees get concerned about it, and so do customers. We had our competition was telling customers at the time that M.M. Weaver's isn't going to go anywhere because Irvin and Edward are aging out, and it's gonna die. Yeah. And it just motivated me to grab a hold and run with it. So pursued it and became the leader there at M.M. Weaver.
Craig, I think Eugene just did a little commercial for our succession planning business here at North Group.
Right.
So thank you for that. We'll get to this, the relationship between M.M. Weaver and Binkley & Hurst that eventually led to this merger that we're going to talk about. But how would you describe the relationship between these two companies? Because on some level, you would have been competitors. And as you described it, only 8 miles apart, both successful, but there had to be situations where customers were coming to both of you, and one of you had to be the winner. And who's going to sell the combine, or who's going to service their parts needs and service needs, things of that nature. How would you describe that relationship?
Binkley and Hurst and M.M. Weaver were competitors in every area, every level.
area.
It was not a working together leading up to the merge. It wasn't something that we talked together about how things are going. We were competition.
Respectful?
Yes, very respectful of each other.
But you still want to win.
We wanted to win.
Sure.
And
companies.
Eugene, they started almost exactly at the same time M.M. Weaver did,
They did.
right? And then in the 1930s.
Yes.
So this has been a 90-year, 85, 90-year friendly competitive environment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. If you go back to the early days of the M.M. Weaver, Binkley and Hurst, there was a lot more farm equipment dealers in Lancaster County. There was, I think my great-grandfather would have said there was 20-some farm equipment dealers just in Lancaster County that they were all competing with each other. So there was a lot of competition.
Yeah.
And even today yet, or even when the merge happened, there was still a lot of competition. We have some very strong competitors in Lancaster County, and we all serve the greater area around Lancaster County, to the point that competition is good. Because if you don't have competition, you can get relaxed in what you're doing.
Yep.
So competition is what kept every one of us sharp.
Yep.
And that's the reason that we're all in business, is because we were competing with each other so strong. It made us rise.
And the customers benefit.
The customers
because
benefit.
You're getting better at your craft, whether
Yes.
it's sales, parts, service, products. The customer benefits.
That's
And
right.
Sometimes they even benefit, from a dollar standpoint, and I think that's something we all understand.
Yes.
The first time North Group got involved, I'm sure I'm not the only one at North Group, but I was friends with Don Hoover, who is the CEO, former CEO and principal owner, I think, of Binkley and Hurst. And
Yes.
Don called us and said, "Hey, we have this. I don't even know how to explain AGCO, so I'm going to flip that to one of you. But we have this dealer, representative, manufacturer called AGCO, and they're encouraging us to be talking to one of our competitors about coming together somehow, because they would rather service us as a combined company. Is that accurate? I mean, that's the first conversation I had with it.
Yeah. To say that AGCO is the one that pushed this to happen, I would not go there.
You wouldn't? Okay,
I would
thank
not.
you. Yeah.
AGCO encouraged it. I've had numerous people at AGCO tell me, only do this if it makes sense for Binkley and Hurst and M.M. Weaver.
Okay.
Do not do this just because AGCO says to do it. Do it because you want to do it. Binkley and Hurst was a Case IH dealer, sold Case IH for many years. They started taking on the AGCO brands. I don't have the exact year, but in the last 20 years, they took on the AGCO brands and started growing the AGCO side of their business. So with this merge, we merged as AGCO dealers. Binkley and Hurst lost the Case contract then along with this merge. So it cleaned up some of the branding in Lancaster County.
Would you say that makes it, what would you say the benefit is to the customer, to the ag producer? What's the benefit?
So by combining the two of us together, we could get better discounts, get better pricing.
Okay.
So we could price better. We could get better at what we're doing. We could be more focused on our brand, the brand that we're doing, the Fendt brand, Massey brands. So we could, you might say, take out some of the other brands that we had and become more focused. By becoming more focused, you can do a better job stocking the parts. You can do a better job servicing. The more you sell something, the better you can train your techs to work on that. So we could become better at what we do in a narrow focus rather than doing a little bit of everything, multiple brands.
Eugene, I remember we were in our planning meeting, and we had just a great discussion about, are we going to put our flag on premium products, or are we going to plant our flag on customer service or another area? And it just went round and round, and it was a great debate, maybe a little unsettling for some people, but it really came out that those were the two cornerstones of who we are as a company. We are only going to sell the highest quality of product out there.
Right.
And at the same time, we're going to continue with the customer service relationship that both companies have built. And bringing these two things together allowed that, I think, to happen to a greater extent than if you had stayed two separate entities.
Yes, for sure. We had Binkley and Hurst and M. Weaver, we had two different approaches of how we did it. The Binkley and Hurst approach for customer service was having all the products the customer may need, so multiple brands. And the M. Weaver approach was being a lot more focused on fewer items, and we do a very good job on these brands, these products, and we had built our business on the premium products. So you're right, Craig. It was a debate which one rises higher between the premium products.
Well, they both made their way into your mission statement.
Yes, that's right.
So at some point you decided we can bring the strength of these two strengths of these companies and make them a dual strength of one company. Is that?
That's exactly what happened. Is those two things? No one had to really let go of one thing or the other. We could merge them both together and make that a beginning starting point.
So here's advice I have received numerous times over the years, and I've been asked about this numerous times over the years. Roger, you can't really do a 50-50 partnership successfully, can you? Wouldn't you advise us, Roger, to figure out who's going to be 51 and who's going to be 49%? I've heard that one. Related to that one is the idea that no true merger of two companies ever exists. There always is I'm not quite sure what term I want to use.
An acquisition.
Yeah, it's an acquisition. There's a kingpin. There's one that's going to be stronger than the other. We might as well just admit that from the beginning and go about that. It doesn't seem like you guys bought into that advice, which is predominant advice in business, and I think it comes from lots of different places where those types of situations just haven't turned out well. But it seemed to me like I was involved just in the original conversations before Craig became the principal person to help bring the two companies together. It seemed like that was the intent from the beginning. Now, that couldn't have been easy. Craig, do you want to comment? Now, obviously, we'll ask Eugene to do that. On, is it a true merger? I mean, how did you pull that off?
It really is, even to the point where we came up with a new name, because there was no one name that was going to be the dominant name.
All right, tangent alert. Agriteer. I mean, where in the world does that come from? I mean, what is that made up of? Eugene, you got what is that?
Well, we work with an independent company that does branding.
Okay.
And we had multiple meetings with them. You would think it'd be easy to name a company, but there was a lot of work went into just the name.
Almost every term is trademarked anymore, so you got to make up names or make up words.
Make up words. That's what it came down to. We need to make up word. We need to make something up. And the way we came up with the Agriteer, or the way it was sold to us, is when you look at Agriteer, you have the ag, which is agriculture. That's what we do. You have the word grit in there, which is working with farmers. There's a lot of grit involved. That's the language they understand.
Okay.
And then the EER at the end is like pioneer, or I think the other term that got used a lot was one with, like you have a volunteer,
mountaineer, pioneer.
It's bringing personal, bringing it together.
Okay.
So that's how we come up with the Agriteer. That's what the Agriteer name means.
Yeah. So 3 words: agriculture, grit, and pioneer.
Yes.
Yeah.
You should have paid somebody maybe like $1,000 to come up with that or something.
Yeah,
they got paid.
That would have been a good deal.
They got paid for it.
They got paid for that. Oh, good for that.
But Roger, back to the original question of how did we make the merger happen? It really was, the planning team. Binkley and Hurst and M. Weaver each chose 3 people to be on the planning team.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that's where it started to mesh, because trust wasn't there immediately.
No.
I mean, there were kind of two sides, and everyone was doing a little bit of a dance, and we're all people, we have our own self-interest kind of at heart, but yet people were open to building something new. And so we started almost at the ground level at looking at what both entities did and what is the best of both that we could bring to the new company. And so over a period of time, and we met, it was once a month at first, and then it went to every other week, and then it went to every week.
Every week, yes.
That we got together. And through that repetitive meeting schedule and really putting on the agenda the big topics that needed to be discussed, trust started really to build that, hey, we're all after the same thing, and we have a common goal, and that is to create a great company that can really service the customers and do right by the employees at the same time.
What could have gotten in the way, Craig?
What would have gotten in the way is if there wasn't the give and take. If people would have held a hard line that, no, this has to be it. Because what appeared to be, if it was too much negotiation and not enough of listening and changing and adapting and working together, but the kind of the hard line, as we often think of negotiation, it's got to be my way or I'm walking out of here. I never experienced any part of that piece of it.
You have anybody walk out of the room?
No, we didn't. But there was good spirited discussion around the table. There was disagreement around the table, but we always seemed to be able to work through that. And Eugene, I don't know how that happens, but we did work through it, and there were hard conversations to be had. I mean, we're talking about writing a whole human resource book with different philosophies around what exactly human resource policies and practices are. The operating agreement and every piece of that had to be worked through.
Yes.
But what was that allowed that to take place as well as it did?
Well, I would give a lot of credit to the North Group here and Craig for you leading those discussions, coming in with a neutral opinion or neutral thoughts on it, to be able to take in and look at what is the best for the company, and not get focused on how did one company do it or the other company do it. It's what's the best. How can we take what's best and bring it together and move forward with it? And I'll admit I was the biggest problem in this whole merge, because I can be strong natured, and I start talking, and I learned a lot. One thing I did learn for sure is coming into it, I have a tendency of saying something as if it's a fact. This is a direction that something was decided, and this is the direction we're going. And some people not hearing all the discussions, thinking that it was, wait a minute, we didn't even discuss that. How'd you come up with that this is the direction it's going? Well, I was just throwing something out there because let's start moving. I was always looking for bringing things together. Let's make a decision and move on. So if I felt like the decision wasn't coming, I would say how I think it should be, and I could come across as this is the direction it's going, and it needs to be that
Eugene,
way.
you got called out for that too.
I did.
Yes,
I needed to.
But it actually was a really good moment for the whole group, because someone in the group said, Eugene, I don't like the way you are approaching this, or something to that effect. And and the way you responded made it work, because you listened to it. And I think you apologized even at that time and said,
I should have if I didn't.
Yeah, I think you did. But that helped the group really come together. One, that somebody could raise that concern, and two, the way you responded to it was excellent.
Craig, were there times when you emerged from one of those meetings, as the consultant or the convener, however we want to look at that, wondering whether this was actually going to happen? Were there a few moments like that?
I never wondered if this was going to happen. I walked into some of the meetings thinking, okay, we've got a really tough conversation. I don't know where this is going to go. And I was always pleasantly surprised at the end. Because what I had in my mind was of how this could create conflict, division.
Sure.
Usually was expressed almost in silence more than outburst. And yet it just kept moving. And so, yeah, there were times when I knew this is going to be a tough conversation. Who's going to be on the director team? When we had a solid group of people around the table that could have all taken different positions on that director team. How are we going to protect the minority interests in the operating agreement? Because we had different ownership shares even represented around that planning team.
Yes.
And so, you walk into those meetings and you think, all right, here we go. I wonder how this is going to work out. And I always left the meeting pleasantly surprised that it was easier than what I had anticipated it being.
It would seem to me that at some point, all the members of the planning team, and maybe all the owners, would have had to inject a degree of humility to this, because almost everybody had to, on a personal level, I would think, give something up for the greater good.
Yep.
And really, when you think about it, in our organization, North Group, we talk a lot about this Robert Greenleaf concept of servant leadership, and it's tossed around a lot, but you don't see it played out in its purest form all that often. But the overall idea of that is an individual is willing to subvert his or her own interests for something larger than himself, believing that the long-term outcome will be good, not only for everyone, but for the individual. And, most of us are not wired that way. I think Eugene already indicated maybe he's not always wired that way.
Not.
And I would say, occasionally I come on strong, Craig. I don't know if you've ever experienced
On
that
occasion,
or not.
yeah.
So I thought of humility and I thought of courage. Those were a couple character traits that I don't know I was wondering what you experienced.
Yeah, certainly the humility side, and the courage came with time. It wasn't there right at the beginning. People held back, but that came with time as trust was built up, and so people felt that they could disagree, and it was okay. But again, Eugene, you said some nice words about North Group, but just having a third party in the room, I think, helped that, because I didn't have one direction or the other in mind coming into this. And so that diffused some things. But I am curious, Eugene. I mean, I saw the room as the room was together, but then you went back and you were there every day and you could hear other commentary elsewhere. Was there a lot of work you had to do outside of the meeting room?
I'm going to say not a lot, Craig. And as the MM Weaver group, I would feel like there was a lot of trust built there already. Trust in the three of us that were coming to the meetings. So yes, they asked questions. How are things going? What's happening here? Who's winning? Type of questions. In this, I mean, that's really what it felt like. Yeah. And so there was some discussions, but none that were just challenging the group here. That I don't remember that it ever came up that. Challenging the group and the decisions that were being made here at the group. One thing that going into it or going through it, one of the very early conversations, I don't remember which one, whether it was you, Roger, or Craig, that said it, that leadership and ownership are two different things. And if the sooner that you guys can all recognize that, the better off we're going to be. The group that was here meeting, they were all owners. And as owners, you can get the feeling like you need to be the directors, the leaders, and running this company. And that's something I've thought about several times as we're going through the process. I try to keep that in mind that as an owner myself, I want the best people running this company, the best people managing what's going on is going to be in my best interest and my investment into the company. So that was very good advice. I thought of that often as we were going through it.
Well, when we talk about the two groups, the Binkley and Hurst and the MM Weaver group, actually the Binkley and Hurst group had a little harder time because, of course, you were the leader of MM Weaver and you were around the table, and Don had a planned retirement.
Yes, right. Okay. I
So,
remember that.
so they, he was planning on his exit upon this merger taking place. And so they had to even come to the table thinking, well, we're not sure who our new leader is going to be.
Well,
and
Don
what,
wasn't one of the group because of his planned retirement.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, so it was a little bit inequitable almost on that level because Eugene was the acknowledged leader of MM Weaver, but there wasn't one.
That's right.
B&H, is that what you're saying?
That's right.
Okay, yeah.
So they had to overcome kind of that piece of it in addition to all the other changes that were taking place. And that took time also. Okay. And, initially we started with the operating agreement that major decisions had to be by a supermajority of 67%. Mm-hmm. And part of that was because of unsureness of, well, what's the MM Weaver side going to do on this? Right. And rightfully so, because they were new to it. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, Roger, a year later, we've had to rewrite parts of the operating agreement. And everyone's around the table said, hey, there's no reason for that supermajority.
Really?
And we're back to a 50-50.
You changed it?
Yeah, the votes of 50% can make the decision because that trust has been built, not only at the planning team, but I think throughout the organization and by all the owners, that they trust each other. Yeah. And we get together. Wow. We get together on numerous occasions, and you can just see everyone interacting with each other really well.
I'll just talk to that second operating agreement that we had to do. I had the opportunity to go around to all the owners to get that signed. And as I was going to some of the former Binkley&Hurst owners and asking them to sign it, and I made sure to very specifically say they were going from supermajority to just the majority, so 50% is majority now, or 50% is majority. Are you okay with that? And numerous ones said, we're all one company, we're moving ahead together. Of course we're okay with that. Wow. It just makes sense. So it really felt good.
There's a lot of trust there.
There was.
Yes.
I want to go back to Eugene's point about separating roles as ownership and leadership. There's another role that emerged there because you have now 52 shareholders, if I heard you correctly.
That's correct.
So that's complicated on some level, but you can overcome the complication on a human level when there's trust established, but you can also overcome it by just following good governance procedures in that the shareholders elect the board, which is your governance, which is your highest authority in the organization. So in North Group, when we're starting down this path with different organizations, we point out that there's 4 major roles you need to run any organization well, which is ownership, governance, leadership, and production. So you may be an owner, but you may not be. It's possible you wouldn't be a leader in the organization, but you'd be a high producer. That's okay, as long as we understand our roles and as we make sure that we're acting in the proper role at the proper time. So at some point, you had to say, okay, I think we're going to pull this off, but we need to have a governance structure of some kind. And so that you now have a board of directors.
Yeah, so we held the first election, and it was interesting. For the first board, we allowed each entity to vote 3 members onto the board of directors so that the board would continue to be equal representation around the table. Now that changes for the second and the third election going, or the future elections going forward. So the names were on the ballots. We had a lot of fun with it. People would come up and put their ballot in the right box, who they were voting for. But we began meeting monthly, and the meetings were good and productive. And it was the same group that was elected that was part of the planning team.
So the planning team was 3 folks that at the time were employed by Binkley&Hurst, 3 by Agriteer, and then yourself as the convener.
Yes. That's right.
And then when it was time to elect the board, they elected the same 6 people?
The exact same 6. So there was a lot of trust in how that planning team did their work, communicated, and got the job done.
You're a part of that also, aren't you, Craig?
That's right. Serving as the chairman of the board right now.
Yeah.
And so and so this year we have decided we're just going to meet for longer periods of time quarterly. And part of that is we have a well-functioning directors group. And so the board doesn't have to be involved in all of the day-to-day, the operational side of the business, and can stay more at an elevated level. And if we meet too often, we're just going to get into the operations, right, Eugene?
That's right. Yeah.
So that's why meeting quarterly and for an extended period of time.
In that original operating agreement, we did say that in 1 year in, our second time to do the vote, we're going to do it the same way, voting 3 on each side. That did get taken out of the current operating agreement, but I think there's still the agreement that we would do it that way one more time, just to keep 3 from either side, you might say. After we'd agreed that after 2 years in, there is no different sides anymore. It's all one company.
Yeah.
We currently have a lot of employees that are asking if it's possible to buy in as an owner.
That's right.
So that's another thing that we'll be looking at,
Sure.
those possibilities. But the board functions very well, and also just setting up accountability for myself as a president, and also being part of the board. We have the executive sessions where I step out. The board discusses things about me. They have every right to put me off the position and put somebody else in that position. So it gives some accountability. I think that's important that the rest of the team even knows that there is that accountability in place. That I can't just run off with things because of my position.
Yeah, that was something we talked about a lot as a board. Of hey, we're in charge of one employee and one employee only.
Yep.
And that is Eugene in his position that he's in as president. And then we do after every meeting, well, every quarter, now that we're quarterly, after every quarterly meeting, we have an executive session.
Which means that Eugene leaves because he's on the board and he's the CEO.
That's
so
right.
Now the rest of the board needs to evaluate his performance as CEO.
If there's any concerns, if there's anything that needs to be brought to the attention and needs to be followed up with Eugene.
It's very easy for a group of people that are functioning as part of an organization on a day-to-day basis or in a nonprofit to sink down below the level of what the board is really responsible for. But what really comes to it, you're responsible to make sure the organization is on mission, that it's financially viable, and to oversee the performance of the chief executive or executive director, whatever the term, and a sub point of that is to plan for the succession and future of the organization. But if you're executing a board meeting inside of those 3 principles there, those 3 responsibilities, you're staying above the fray and letting the organization function as it should.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing, particularly the smaller nonprofits we get into. And of course, Craig, we work with a ton of them. It's a privilege to work with a ton of them, but we constantly have to call them back to their 3 main responsibilities. And it sounds like you're going by those principles at Agriteer.
Yeah, we're well on our way, and we'll have our first quarterly board meeting in January. So looking forward to that.
Yeah. One more thing I was curious about, and that is that I would imagine in each organization prior to the merger, there would have been a sales manager, a parts manager, maybe a new equipment sales manager and a used equipment. There would be a service manager, I expect. But if you have a truly merged company, and this does sound like it's a merger.
Yes, it was a merge.
It's a merger. It's what people tell us can't happen.
That's right.
And we've been over that.
Yeah.
It's trust, it's humility, it's courage. But at some point, you would have to decide there's only going to be one. Craig, were you involved in those questions? I mean, how did
Yeah, I don't know how many meetings we draw up the organizational chart and put down, okay, now there's several possibilities for each one of these positions, and had a discussion around the table. And sometimes some of the names up on the board were around the table.
Yeah.
And and I'm sure there was a little bit, well, I know there was a little bit of, boy, I'd like to be maybe in that position or another position, but we can only choose one. And again, it comes back to what Eugene said. We need to find what is the best for the entity, for Agriteer. And it doesn't mean it has to be that way for all time, but for right now, who do we think is the right person.
So you had a sales manager at Binkley and Hurst. You had a sales manager in MM Weaver. Was there any case where the person that was named was not either of those people?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really?
So, sales manager, you mentioned one. A third person was named who actually wasn't even an employee at the time.
Right.
But we knew they were available and they were talented.
So you brought somebody from the outside to take on
we did.
that role.
That's right.
Wow. Okay. So nobody.
Service manager, the same thing. The director of service. We had people that do an excellent job at service around the table, but there was another employee that was chosen for that role because to be able to do some of the important parts of the manager role is different than being an expert on the service side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there was a strong feeling that this person would be good at the more of the manager type duties of.
Plus, you had to look at people with greater capacity. They're managing a much larger
Yes.
dollars of sales, number of customers, number of employees,
Number of stores.
Number of stores. Thank you. You had to look at capacity there as well.
Yeah.
I'm having some flashbacks here personally to. I'm a very competitive person. I mean, you're a competitive person. I suspect Eugene is. Most business people are on some level. And there's a baseline of competitiveness that goes to selfishness. Or maybe to self-belief, if we want to give it a little bit more credit. And at some point, people had to give some of that away to make this happen. So that would be one of the, I'm flashing back to a situation I was in when I was in my 30s, and I look back on that, I said, I'm glad I was not employed by one of these companies because I surely would have misbehaved. Maybe I still would, but if I go back 30 years to a situation, I remember I clawed my way to victory, but it didn't end up being a victory, if that makes sense. What we ended up with was not a good thing for the company, and it was not a good thing for my character.
Yeah.
But I won, because I just worked harder, articulated better, or asserted more, or demanded more. I'm not proud of that now, but I'm flashing back to if I had been the sales manager for one of those stores, or for one of the companies, I would have misbehaved. Did you have to call that out from time to time, Craig, or was there just such a basis of trust and humility there that it wasn't needed?
Roger, I think what comes to my mind comes back to probably the first core value that we have as a group of honoring God. And that was a shared value around the table, expressed mainly in an Anabaptist Christian way, that everyone around the table shared. And so that helps curb some of that just raw competitiveness that's out there, to be thinking of, well, am I doing right to my brother or to my sister sitting next there, and am I doing right for the entity and all of the employees?
Yes.
Because we all have to battle against that personally, and then we come back to some of that shared value. So that was very much present around that table, and I think that helped us get to the place that we needed to get in some of these conversations.
What a great principle.
Yeah.
Would the large majority of people that were involved in these conversations have maybe had that in their heritage, in their belief system already, so it was something that everybody understood, even if they didn't behave completely consistent with it in any moment? They could be brought back to it when things got tense or when somebody went off the rails for a short period of time?
Yeah. I strongly believe that. And quick to make sure to correct themselves because of that. Because again, as we met on a weekly basis for a long period of time, we also became kind of close with each other. I look forward to seeing these guys every week coming through the door because we enjoyed each other. And
honestly, Craig, that could have gone one direction or another. It doesn't stay the same. When a group works at hard challenges together, they either grow closer together or they grow farther apart. You almost never stay static.
Yeah.
So I hear you saying,
we grew, in my opinion, we grew closer together.
Definitely.
In fact, it just feels like no matter how often we get together, it feels good to come together again and to see each other.
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, Craig. It was, and that those meetings every week helped to build trust helped to bring unity together. It was amazing what that did over time, just learning to know each other. We have these assumptions of each other.
Yeah.
And if we sit back and just think about the assumptions and how what we think the other person's thinking and don't have that conversation, it breaks down and you can dwell on it and it goes downhill very quickly. But here, coming together once a week, we didn't have time to process on some of those negativities too long. We'd come together, Craig would bring it up and be laid out there, and it'd be like everybody's just open about it. We talk about it, and it's like, oh, we're more alike on these things than what we thought. We thought that we were not thinking at all alike on these subjects, whatever it may be. But getting together that often definitely helped us bring it together.
If somebody said to me one time, only we know our true intentions. Others see our behaviors. And we're human, so there's always going to be gaps.
Yeah.
So if we focus only on the other person's behavior, sooner or later, that's going to create a problem, and then it's eventually going to create a trust gap. But if we go a little deeper and we commit to believing the best about the other person's intentions, we have a chance to overcome the misbehaviors that are inherent really in every individual. You think about this in a marriage, you think about this in a family, and now we advance this to, a business where people have all had some kind of experience with a lack of trust at some point in their life. You don't get this far in life without having experienced that.
That's right.
And if you have flashbacks to that and say, hey, that's going to happen again, this thing would have broken down at some point.
Yeah. And I would say the first maybe 3 months we met together as a planning team, behaviors were good, but there was still that mistrust of intentions. And then slowly that started to break down, and everyone realized, hey, we're in this together. We're not as far apart as we thought we were.
Yeah.
We actually think very similarly, and we can work out all these little differences and get to a good spot.
Agriculture, grit, pioneer equals Agriteer.
It's a great name.
Yes.
A true merged company
Yeah.
belying conventional wisdom.